We are currently trapped by a deeply dangerous illusion of certainty. The next financial crisis will not look like the last one.
That is exactly why most people will not be ready. You see, when disaster actually strikes, our traditional financial preparations almost always fail us. And today we're going to explore exactly why the future is so incredibly dangerous. Not because we know nothing, but because we often think we know way too much. Welcome to this explainer, where we're diving into the fascinating and honestly somewhat unsettling core concepts from Morganhousel's work on the psychology of money.
Section 1. The Historian as Prophet.
So to understand why we're continually blindsided, we first have to look at why investors absolutely obsess over historical data. I mean, we live in a chaotic, sometimes terrifying financial system, right? So looking at data stretching back decades gives us this deeply comforting illusion of control. We desperately want to believe that if we just study the past hard enough, we can perfectly map out the future. But there is a massive irony in using history as a map for tomorrow. As Stanford professor Scott Sagan perfectly put it, things that have never happened before happen all the time. Think about that. We take history, which is literally a subject composed entirely of wild, unprecedented surprises, and we try to use it as an unassailable, precise guide to what happens next. It's crazy.
And this leads us straight into what we call the historians as prophets fallacy. It is a fatal mental trap. We over-rely on past data in a field where innovation and change are the literal lifeblood of progress. Just because you survived the 2008 crash or rode the dot-com bubble doesn't mean you can forecast the next shift. Experiencing specific past events usually just leads to a whole lot of overconfidence, not actual forecasting ability. We mistakenly think we've got a crystal ball. Actually, scratch that, it's worse. We think our rearview mirror is a crystal ball. Section 2. Finance is not physics. A massive reason we fall into this trap is because we treat the stock market like it's a hard, predictable science. But let's look at the actual hard sciences for a second. Geology, meteorology, medicine. A geologist can look at 1 billion years of data to model the Earth. A human kidney operates the exact same way today as it did 1,000 years ago. But investing? Investing is entirely different. It is not governed by unbreakable physical laws. It's really just a massive group of people making totally imperfect decisions with highly limited information, and they're driven by anxiety, greed, and paranoia.
The legendary physicist Richard Feynman had this brilliant observation. He said, "Imagine how much harder physics would be if electrons had feelings." Well, investors do have feelings, millions of them, and they are changing every single minute of every single day. The markets are entirely driven by unpredictable, emotional humans, and you just cannot map human emotion onto a clean, predictable spreadsheet. No way.
Plus, the invisible hand of economics actively hates it when things stay too good or too bad indefinitely. As the investor Bill Bonner described it, Mr. Market wears a capitalism at work t-shirt and carries a sledgehammer. The economy is constantly destroying the status quo. Financial conditions rarely stay the same for very long at all. So expecting your future to perfectly mirror the past completely ignores the very nature of progress.
Section 3. When tails drive everything.
Okay, so if normal, average events aren't driving history, what on earth is? The answer is extreme, singular outliers. We call these tail events. A tiny, tiny handful of unprecedented occurrences drive orders of magnitude more impact than billions of everyday events combined. Just look at this list: the Great Depression, World War II, the Manhattan Project, the dot-com bubble, September 11th, the 2008 financial crisis. This concept dictates absolutely everything, from global markets to venture capital, where just one massive tech disruption vastly outweighs 1,000 failed startups. Billions of people lived through the 20th century, but a microscopic fraction of events entirely shaped the global economy we live in today.
And the reason these tail events completely dominate is because of how wildly they compound. Let's visually map out this bizarre chain reaction so you can see what I mean. September 11th happens, a totally unprecedented, tragic tail event that directly prompts the Federal Reserve to dramatically cut interest rates. Then, those rock-bottom rates help inflate a massive housing bubble. The bubble bursts, triggering the 2008 financial crisis. Suddenly, millions of people are facing a totally decimated job market, so they decide to hide out by seeking a college education. And this directly leads to a $1.6 trillion student loan crisis. It is utterly impossible to predict a modern student loan crisis by looking at past economic data, because the ultimate catalyst was an airport security failure on a Tuesday morning in 2001. That is how wildly things compound.
Section 4. The Unprecedented Future Trap.
This compounding effect brings us to a really terrifying realization about how we do worst-case planning. We almost always assume the future's worst events will perfectly match the past's worst events. I want you to compare these two historical approaches to risk. In pharaonic Egypt, scribes tracked the high water mark of the Nile and used that exact past measurement to plan for the future worst-case flood. Fast forward thousands of years, and we did the exact same thing at the Fukushima nuclear reactor. It was built to withstand the worst past historical earthquake, but in 2011 it experienced a catastrophic failure. Why? Because it was hit by an unimaginably large, completely unprecedented tsunami. Failing to imagine an event worse than the past isn't a failure of analysis. It's a severe failure of imagination.
The legendary psychologist Daniel Kahneman noted that when we make a mistake because we didn't anticipate something, our immediate reaction is usually, well, I'll never make that mistake again. But that's entirely the wrong takeaway. As Kahneman says, the correct lesson to learn from surprises is that the world is surprising. Past surprises shouldn't be used as future boundaries. They should be used as admissions that we truly, fundamentally, do not know what comes next.
Section 5. When things actually change.
Now we have to explore the incredible nuance of what is easily the most dangerous phrase in investing. It's different this time. Usually saying that is a great way to get laughed out of the room, but sometimes it's actually entirely accurate because the structural reality of the world has completely shifted. Look at how our environment has evolved. If you rely on retirement data from before the 1980s, you're looking at a world before the 401k and the Roth IRA even existed. If you look at historic market returns, you are often looking at an industrial-heavy economy. But today, massive technology monopolies drive the vast majority of returns. Information used to be incredibly scarce, and now we have high-speed global flow. This is exactly why the brilliant mathematical formulas of Benjamin Graham eventually became outdated. The markets literally adapted to his math. Now, his deeper psychological wisdom? That remained timeless.
History is the study of change, which is ironically used as a map of the future because economies constantly evolve. Very recent history is often a much, much better guide to the future than data stretching back centuries. Think about it. You wouldn't use a map of New York from 1850 to navigate rush hour traffic today. So why on earth would you use the economy of 1850 to navigate your modern portfolio?
Section 6. History without the prophecy.
So where does this leave us? If predicting the future is a trap and past data is misleading, how do we actually prepare ourselves? We need a framework for utilizing history without falling into its traps. And this anchors us right back into the core philosophy of Morganhousel's work. Doing well with money actually has very little to do with how smart you are and a whole lot to do with how you behave. Soft behavioral skills matter far, far more than rigid math-based financial formulas. Spreadsheets are great at telling you if numbers add up. What they absolutely cannot tell you is how you're going to feel when your portfolio drops 40% and you have to look your children in the eyes.
So here is your practical framework. You must respect history to understand the timeless patterns of human behavior. Greed, fear, panic, and overconfidence. Those never change. Study history to understand exactly how people react to stress, but never ever confuse history with a prophecy for specific future events. Focus your financial planning on building room for error, maintaining emotional discipline, and preparing for surprises, rather than trying to perfectly time the market based on some historical chart.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply important question I want you to ask yourself today. If the most impactful events of the future will be entirely unprecedented, are you preparing for the unknown, or are you just betting on a repeat of the past? Stop relying on prophecy. Start preparing for the surprise. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. I highly encourage you to respect history, but never let it convince you that you hold the map to tomorrow.